You're skeptical of the state. You're getting over the myth of authority.
But the state is still formidable. Or is it?
You've got a front row seat in the transition to a free society.
Let's dive headfirst into
The White Pillbox with your host, Mark Maresca.
Greetings all. Thank you so much for joining today. Today I'd like to welcome back subscriber James. James, welcome back to The White Pillbox.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me again.
James has been on, as you folks know, a few times, and he's one of our subscribers that enjoys coming on and discussing various topics relating to our predominant themes here on the White Pillbox. And he did write to me recently and said he had a couple of things he would like to go over. Here it is at the end of 2025, and I think it'll make a good sort of wrap up to the year. So, James, why don't you dive in and let me know what it is you'd like to go over?
Fantastic. Thank you so much. There's at least two areas I'd like to hear your thoughts on, and it is actually possible we're going to blend those two together. You've had some guests on your show, some I had not heard of and really enjoyed those. I'd kind of like to jump back to James Corbett because recently I came across something he posted, which was 2025, the year the narrative changed. So not only would I like just some of your impressions and takeaways from these guests this past year, but maybe specifically on James Corbett on that narrative change and your views on how that came across to you.
Well, yeah. So first of all, regarding all the guests, I consider myself lucky that I've managed to get these folks. They're all delightful people, and they're all very generous, extremely generous with their time. And I found that in this space, I come across a lot of folks like that, both who are scholars and big players, but also people who are like yourself. You know, they're just highly interested in it. They're enthusiastic, but all of them have always been extremely courteous, extremely generous with their time. And I just consider myself lucky to have been able to interview a lot of these. Now, James Corbett, yes, I really enjoyed his recent article. And since you bring it up, I'll go ahead and link to it.
One thing I'd like to hear from you and why I kind of went back to Corbett and the year the narrative changed. In a lot of your recent, maybe the last 6 months or so interviews, I notice a changing narrative, dialogue, the way people are talking, using terms differently than in the past, much more. The only way I can say it is everyone is starting to recognize we are on this transition. We are in that inflection point, and it's happening.
Yeah. So we want to stay grounded when we make observations like that. And that was going to be how I would sort of discuss his article. But big picture, it is true. The tone of the dialogue seems to have changed in this last year. You're getting these content providers, they're not talking about the transition to a free society. You're not hearing anyone actually use those terms. And that probably means they're not thinking that way. But if you just sort of get a feel for the tone of what they're saying and the content they're dispensing and so on, you get the idea that there's a shift going on. It is different. It's still political. Yes, all that stuff is still in there. But you do get a sense that the state is sort of on the ropes a little bit. Like, I don't know if that encapsulates.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. But having said that, I don't think most content providers are putting that piece together. They're not seeing that running thread. And that's why this James Corbett recent article is really good, because it takes some of these things and puts them together. And he's trying to show you, look, things seem to be changing. And that's good. Now, he does stop there. You know, he's fair enough and scientific enough, let's say, to say, okay, we can't make much more out of that right now than just, hey, this is really kind of good news that all these narratives are shifting. But this is part of a bigger trend. So when we talk about that famous inflection point, right, the one that I'm talking about so often, this is sort of some evidence, I think, that we are for sure in that early stage. But here again, I don't know that the content providers are seeing it in that exact way.
The one piece that keeps popping up, at least I'm hearing it, is they're saying things about the propaganda. And right there it is. There's the is it the main tool or the only tool the state really can use to keep things together their way? But
Yeah.
they've said it in certain ways that the propaganda is obvious and it's failing.
Yes, they're saying it in different ways, but even there, that's almost too precise a way to describe it. But I don't think they themselves would say it in as strong a terms, or they wouldn't emphasize it. That's why the episode I did on Dave Smith is Dave Smith onto something. You can watch him talk about it, but he doesn't yet take that next step and say, "Oh, okay, there must be something something to this that's more tangible." He's sort of waiting until the dust settles in a sense before he makes an evaluation of it. I think it is time to make an evaluation, and that's why I'm trying to urge fellow content providers to see this trend. So let me take the first topic that James took, which was I
Sure,
think it was
great.
it's the so-called MAHA movement. I think that's a switch up on the Make America Great Again movement, MAGA. And then MAHA was sort of a change up to that based on health. I think it was Make America Healthy Again. And I think he's essentially saying that we start the beginning of the year kind of worrying that, oh boy, they're going to start some kind of new government programs or mandates. But here we are at the end of the year, and it's like, yeah, all that's pretty much fizzled. No one's really hearing about anything like that. They're not talking that way. They seem to have other fish to fry. And so there's a trend that we could say is good news. Does that
I agree,
square
yeah.
with your experience? Yeah. Another topic that James covered was the climate hoaxes and the climate scares. That definitely was much more on the front burner a year ago. Mainly it was, I think, a Biden type of thing. I don't remember Trump being too much involved with that. But still, the world was still thinking that way, like still really on top of all that and worrying about it and trying to scare us all. And here it is a year later. And then once again, it seems to have fizzled. It's not something you're hearing much about. It's still out there, but, is it getting the press? Okay, the next thing he talked about was 9/11. Now, 9/11 is not really something I've studied much, but I think James has done a lot of deep dives on this. And when we talk about 9/11 in that context, he's talking about what they call 9/11 truth. This is all about the idea that there was more to 9/11 than just the pure terrorist act. There might have been something about it that involved the state, governments, the U.S., the CIA, who knows? Again, I haven't studied it, so I really can't speak on it. They talk about how can two towers have gone straight down in such a perfectly, demolition type of a way. There are others who say that there's nothing particularly unusual about that, even with the way it happened. But with the information that James has dived deep on, he seems to think that that's highly implausible. Plus, there's other buildings that went down. So I really can't take a firm stand on it because I simply don't know one way or the other. Whenever I hear things like this, the way I try to land on it is not only do I not know, but I also would say if it were ever to come out that there were government involvement in it, that would not surprise me. So
Sure.
I can't
Sure.
personally say, yeah, it had some kind of conspiratorial aspect to it. It would not shock me in the least. In any case, I think he said that it's gained much more traction. The number of people and number of prominent people who are now looking into this has increased. And I think that's the change he sees between the beginning of the year and now, that it's getting more attention by slightly more mainstream observers. And if that's true, that's good, because we would always want as many eyes on the state as possible. So again, another change since a year ago. Another big one that James covered was the brutal way that Israel is conducting this war with the Palestinians over there in Gaza. The idea that what's happening is what they call a genocide. Now, that term is difficult to land on because it can have a lot of different definitions. What they really are trying to say, though, is that Israel is being far over the top, even in normal government war type of principles. They are going far too far and too vicious. And of course, libertarians would say that shouldn't be happening at all. I think James is making the point that from a year ago to now, many, many more parties are looking at what's happening there as utterly unacceptable, even for a government. And that means that, there's an illegitimacy about what's happening that in the context of what I talk about is a good thing. You want the things that the government does to be seen as illegitimate. In other words, overall, the skepticism for what's happening over there is increasing. It doesn't mean, it's going to end tomorrow. There are still many parties who are highly supportive of Israel, and many of those parties are powerful, powerful people in politics and their friends. So it's not like that's going to end, but the attention on it has changed from a year ago. And that's a dramatic shift because Israel has really had pretty much unconditional support from pretty much every group for decades and decades. And we really see that shifting. So James rightly points that out. And I think those are the bullet points from James's article, which again show us that things have changed, big current event topics that are quite different from a year ago.
If a regular guy like me, but I'm not podcasting or anything like that, I'm just absorbing it and then having an occasional conversation with you and, messaging people. If a guy like me is picking up on it, everyone else is starting to hear that, as I mentioned, the narrative's changing, the dialogue's changing. One other point to that was some of your guests brought up that we just have technology to thank for this because now the information is just available at everyone's fingertips.
I would say that Larken Rose was probably the one who saw the deep connection between technology and the change in the state's ability to maintain propaganda, because that connection is critical. Kinsella saw it too. I think toward the end we kind of touched on it. But I think Larken is the one who really seemed to really appreciate just how important that is and how unique it is. See, that's the other thing about this, and this is why these conclusions probably seem radical or different, even to the libertarians, the fact that we've started the transition to a free society. How can you say something like that? Well, it's really technology that has made that possible. And of course, specifically for those who haven't heard the backstory to all this in the previous episodes or my Myth of Authority series, it's technology that has enabled information flow to become utterly decentralized. I mean, it is pretty much in anyone's hand today, if they have a smartphone or a smart device of any kind, anywhere in the world, to consume any information they want, whenever they want. Granted, some of what they're seeing still is this spoon-fed propaganda from the state, no doubt. If you turn on CNN, you're going to see that. If you turn on Fox, you're going to see that. If you see a news conference, you're going to see it. But that's not the point. The propaganda is not going to stop. What's changed is the fact that the percentage of time people are spending hearing propaganda is reduced mathematically simply because they are in the driver's seat about what they want to consume. And people simply are not consuming the same degree of statist or institutional media that they did before. They're doing what they want to do in terms of media consumption. So therefore, if what hits their brains in terms of propaganda is a smaller percentage of what it used to be, that's a reduction in propaganda's effectiveness, period. And this is what Larken recognized. And moreover, he recognized that it's a trend that shows no sign of stopping. If anything, it's accelerating. Why would it go backwards? Why would people say, I'm tired of all this consumption that I've been doing, that I love doing every single time I turn on media? I'm tired of that. I want to be spoon-fed 3 TV stations, and I want the radio I listen to be all I can listen to, and at the top of the hour and the bottom of the hour, I want the news and weather. That's ridiculous. That's obviously going in the other direction, which means propaganda is only being diluted in its effectiveness. Now, of course, that's just a couple of pieces of the big puzzle of this, but that's really the essence of it, is that technology has allowed that to be, let's say, triggered.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The other thing that doesn't get too much attention, and I'm going to probably try to spend more time moving forward on this in the podcast, is emphasizing the weaknesses of the state. That does seem to be the one thing that even if you can get a libertarian, voluntarist, anarchist to see that propaganda is failing, they still have that image of the state as the empire in Star Wars, as this fixed, unbeatable, massive foe that does what it wants, when it wants, and has unlimited resources. Of course, that's ridiculous. That's not true. The empire in Star Wars could never have existed because of the resources it would have taken to dominate a galaxy. I mean, when you think it through, it's physically impossible. I mean, it's very entertaining, but that's not really reality. Except that people think in their mind easily that the state is like that. There's sort of this image. And that stops a lot of the libertarians from thinking it through it any further. And that's why I think I want to emphasize that the state genuinely has fundamental weaknesses. And if you internalize that, if you really can grasp just how weak the state is, then I think it's a lot easier to see how the collapse of propaganda is sort of that beginning of the bottom of the house of cards starting to fall over. You know it's
Absolutely.
coming. So that's what I think I'll probably try to put more emphasis on, is the weakness of the state. One of the important things is that the state cannot think. It is a mindless entity, just like anything else that's an institution or group. It doesn't think with a collective brain. And the state is no different than that. What's worse for the state, of course, is that it's so big and so lumbering and so widespread that no one person can think on behalf of it. Even a dictator of a country like in North Korea, that one guy at the top, yes, he's commanding a lot of power and can do a lot of damage, but he personally is also not the mind of the state. There is no such thing. The reason that's a good thing is that the state can't understand what's happening. It can't see this trend. Heck, the libertarians don't see this trend yet, pretty much. So that means it can't even strategize to deal with it. Even if somehow there were powerful enough people that see the trend, their only answer at this point would be to basically shut down the internet. I don't see how they can do it any other way. And even that would fail in a Western country, because people are so used to the internet and having the freedom to choose what they want, they wouldn't put up with it. So I think the time has passed when the government could have done anything to stop this trend, even if they saw it, which of course they can't.
Agreed. Absolutely.
When we say things like that, it's like a cult, it's like an abusive relationship, or it's narcissistic. I think we have to be careful to not make the listener think that we are claiming there are human beings in the state who are at the controls, who are the narcissists, who are the psychopaths, and they're turning dials like a Bond villain. And all we got to do is get those guys out, and we'll have new guys in who are good. It's absolutely nothing like that. It's really an analysis that parallels narcissists or psychopaths or cults or abusive relationships. It parallels those psychological phenomenon with statism and how statism manifests.
If I've caught on to something that you've been saying, is the environment is there for them to behave that way,
Yeah,
and get the results they want.
exactly right. Exactly.
Whoever's the bully, the leader, whatever. But
Right.
yes, I get that. But go on.
Well, and that is it, then, because at the root cause of the state is the belief, or myth, as they often call it, of a political authority. That has to be the starting point for the state to even be able to get off the ground. People, the majority of people in a population, have to believe that they need and want moral rulers over them, that they have to defer their moral sensibilities to a ruling class. You have to have that. And we do have that. And we have had it through, so far as I know, all of recorded history. So yes, we have that myth of authority there. That's the environment you were just talking about. It's the environment of a population who believe in this myth of authority. It's not enough to believe it, though. They have to act on it for it to manifest in the environment through their actions, their collective actions. So you have a population of people believing the myth, acting on it, and now you have it. You have the environment that's hospitable and conducive to what? To the power seekers. And that's the connection. That's the connection to the narcissist, psychopath, busybodies, Karens, whoever it is who gets satisfaction out of having power over others, whether it's small power or large, and they are now attracted to the environment of the myth of authority, which offers up jobs, careers, money, prestige, fame, book deals, right? That's all woven within the behaviors that arise out of the belief in authority. Along come these power seekers. Those power seekers would not have that avenue to go to if the myth didn't exist, or the myth was even a smidge less than it is. And therefore people wouldn't act as much on that, and therefore the environment wouldn't exist as much. And those power seekers then would have to balance the choice to enter power positions with other choices they have in life. And that's what's happening now to a great extent. So for example, the military and the law enforcement career paths are slowly but systematically becoming less attractive to potential military, to potential law enforcement. They have other choices in life, and now slowly they're making those other choices. They are not getting into those fields. Why? Because those environments are less attractive to them. So we are seeing it. The statistics bear that out. We don't see that in politics yet. In other words, the environment of politics, of political careers, is not yet so much less attractive that you see fewer people getting into it. But what is true is that the quality of the people going into politics is definitely, say, a lower grade. And I'm not trying to imply by that in the past, the people who were in politics were not power seekers. They were. But they knew how to play that game to keep the myth going. But now that the myth is starting to erode, the talent for leaning into that myth and to leverage it is also going away because it's not working as well. And that's why you see the Trumps, the Bidens, the Harrises, that breed of people who are now in politics is less impressive, right? They don't even have the impressive quality of being able to fool us well, you see? So there it is. That's the environment altering the population of people entering these fields. Again, we're at the early stage of this, but I'm excited I'm excited about doing this kind of a podcast a year from now at the end of 2026 and do another annual recap. Maybe we'll make that an annual thing where we'll look back, right, and see how it's changed yet again. Now, the one thing I want to say to be careful about with these kind of recaps is that you have to be open-minded enough to realize that these are still short-ish time frames. 1 year is not really enough to, let's say, establish a trend in your mind. We had a good year. James Corbett's article shows that. Other things show that. But we also had a bad year in other ways too. So you could say, the war in Ukraine continues, and for some reason it's just not stopping. That's bad. Trump is talking about a lot of things that he'd like to do that are very, very, very authoritarian. That's all bad. But when I look at things like that, I consider it more business as usual. They're always trying to throw out new things. But what I mean about the trend is that you are nonetheless going to have those months and years. We had a good one in 2025. Things got better in terms of this transition. If things went the other way for us in 2026, I wouldn't look at that as proof that the trend has stopped or the trend is not happening. We have to really look at this in a broader time frame, which to me is more on the order of 5, 10, 15 years.
Agreed. I would agree.
So we should be happy about this last year. It confirms the trends we're seeing.
To give you a brief story on the quality of what's going into the military, I was at a gathering and a young man, about 25 years old, got into a conversation with him, about his career path and all, and not very aspirational up to that point of age. And so what is it you're going to do now? He said, I'm going to get into the Air Force. I go, wow, interesting. And what's your goal there? A desk job. I said, any more specific than that? He goes, it was almost exactly like this. A desk job, 20 years, and I'm set.
Recruitment is down, and this is something I talked about with Larken Rose. We have to be a little careful there because when we say recruitment's down, they could come back and say, no, we're meeting our recruitment goals. We're meeting our recruitment goals. That's sort of true since Trump. So they have been able to meet their goals. But when you drill down, you find a white pill in there. Namely, break that recruitment down by splitting them off into two categories: front of the line type jobs versus not front of the line jobs. When I say front line jobs, I mean the jobs where you carry a gun, you are expected to confront trouble, you may have to shoot people if the circumstances require it, and you yourself may get hurt. That's a frontline job. Everything else is desk, admin, support, inventory, you name it. Guess what? What is going down in number are the frontline jobs. So even though they are meeting the recruitment goals, those are being filled by the admin side, not the frontline side. And that utterly dovetails with what you just said. This guy got into it because he wants an admin job. If you were to ask him, would you have taken it if the requirement would be that you are on the front line, trained and armed, and have to face trouble every day on the street, what do you think he would have said?
We know what he would have said. Absolutely not.
Yeah. He would have said, I'd rather be a Walmart greeter. I'd rather be an accountant. I'd rather be a teacher. I'd rather be whatever other things would interest him in life. That is on the list of things that could interest him, but he chose law enforcement because the environment attracted him to it. And so once again, notice how the environment is what determines these things. But what's really white-pilling about that is that guy, that particular person you met, he's not one of the bullies. He's not a threat. Because if push came to shove, he is not going to arm himself and defend whatever it is the state wants him to defend or attack. He's not going to do it. He may get trained. There may be basic training at the beginning where they do that kind of thing. But ultimately, if they're at a desk, they're not going to be called out. So they can't enforce the rules of the state. So that's a good sign. Did he seem like the type who would have probably gotten other lines of work if that ended up not being an avenue he could have pursued?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's the opportunity that's put in front of him. It isn't, and I noticed this from discussions from many decades past. There was nothing about it that was, I want to serve my country, defend my country, support my leaders. None of that. It's just, it's another LinkedIn opportunity that pops up.
Right.
It has very
right.
little to do with all of that. It's just what was available at the time.
Just think about what you just observed about him, right? It was an opportunity.
Exactly.
It did not have all of that vague, mushy, patriotic stuff in there. Right there, that is evidence that the myth of authority is eroding, because the myth of authority is the only thing that make those patriotic cliches possible. When the myth erodes, you're embarrassed to use phrases like that. You don't say things like that. Instead, you ground yourself in reality. In this case, he's saying, what opportunity is going to give me the most security? I also think it's interesting that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, a person who was looking for long-term stability could have gone to most large companies, certainly government jobs as well, but also large companies, and worked there long enough to get a pension. And they back then would have used phrases like that. All I got to do is put in my 20 years and I'll be good. Meaning they'll have a pension. At that time it was pensions that secured them. So they're still seeking, at least that personality type is still seeking that kind of long-term stability, except the sources from which they're able to find it have dried up. The private market pretty much can't afford to offer those kind of long-term security benefits. They don't anymore. So he's got to scrape the bottom of the barrel by looking at a government job. In this case, he found it in the military. They'll give you a pension. And by the way, I also know acquaintances who have actual government type admin jobs, IT or whatever, and they too are phasing out the long-term pensions. They are all, I shouldn't say all, many of them are moving toward classic 401k type of retirement accounts. In other words, they're basically saying, you're going to have a 401k, you're going to contribute to it, we'll match, so on and so forth, various details. But that's what is now the quote unquote pension, even though it's not a pension, it's whatever you save up. So you could see that even the government can't afford to be that generous with classic pensions anymore. Why? I thought they were the Empire in Star Wars with unlimited resources. No, they're
Agreed.
not. They must live within the environment that they are faced with. In this case, it's a budgetary restriction that they have. So once again, I think these are all little proofs that that the environment's changing, the myth is eroding, propaganda is failing, and with it, we'll eventually see this. We'll see more tangible signs. And I think one of the most glaring signs that we'll see eventually that will probably convince the libertarians will be when politicians themselves start saying things like this, start observing things like this, start quitting based on the environment that they're in, and that becomes more known and the reasons behind them are more clear. We don't see that now because it's subtle. Recently, one of the muckety-mucks in Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think that's her name, I think she resigned. And she was a kind of a powerhouse in Congress. I didn't follow it. I don't follow much of politics at all. But I do know from the little I observed, she was sort of a force to be reckoned with. And a lot of the libertarians liked a lot of what she was saying because she would go against Trump. Okay, well then a few weeks ago, a month ago, she resigned. Or at least she gave her resignation for this coming January 2026. That put a lot of people in a bit of a shock. Like, why would she do that? This was a person who was like kind of inside trying to undo a lot of this stuff. Not libertarian in any way, shape, or form, but aligned on some of the loose libertarian principles. And yet she quit. So here it is, somebody resigning from government, from a good government job. Why?
Why?
And I don't know the specific reasons, but I can tell you the broad reason. The environment wasn't as attractive as whatever it is outside of politics is offering to her. I can almost guarantee you that's the reason, right? If
I would agree.
If it was a threat, let's say it was an outright threat. She got a letter, she got something slipped under her door. You know, your family is at risk if you continue this. Okay, well, that was the environment she was faced with. Maybe it wasn't so dramatic. Maybe she saw writing on the wall that she wasn't going to get support anymore from certain donors. And she was thinking, I'm going to have a legacy that's not as great as I thought it would be. Okay, if that's what it is, that's the environment. Whatever the environment is, clearly it's changed for her.
It's changing, yeah. Maybe she's not getting the accolades she was or is expecting, the support.
Yeah, and we can only speculate on what all that could be. And the one example of this one person, that's not important either. It's merely one of those tangible signs that we look for here and there as indicators that the transition is underway and that the state is on the ropes. I don't know how often it was that major members of Congress or the Senate or government resigned in the middle of their jobs. This person has. I've heard of a few others in the last few weeks who have, not necessarily at the federal level, but and that could be confirmation bias. That could be me noticing it now that I'm aware that that's an important indicator. But I don't think so. I don't think it's as common that we've heard about people resigning. This guy, Dan Bongino, he's one of the people Trump appointed when he got in. Got a lot of fanfare. He is or was a podcaster who was very critical of the deep state. He got in there. I don't even remember the role he had. And he didn't do anything. And eventually now, just recently, I think he's resigning. So resignations maybe are on the uptick a little. I think that's another good sign. So anyway, that's something to probably keep an eye on.
It's interesting because what came to mind when you said that is 10, 20 years ago, conversations about this senator and this president, this person was appointed by the Senate, they impressed the hell out of me. These are important people. These are people of stature and all. And today, zero. It means nothing. These people mean nothing.
That's one of the ways that we notice it, is that there's sort of a reduction in the regard for politicians and political bureaucrats and all that. Not only mocking, which is great, but just sort of quiet disregard. You don't even think about them. They're not important. They're not on your radar. That's an indicator of that, I think.
And I guess we can thank technology for that because we're seeing what we want to see. We're seeing everything all the time.
Yes.
So they can't hide from possibly the despicable things that are going on behind the curtain of the Wizard of Oz, as it would be.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly. And that's an advantage of technology that we don't talk much about, and that is that they are exposed. So it doesn't mean that there's some reporter, doing the follow-up and all that. No, the mainstream reporters are lapdogs of the state. But simply by the fact that anybody can talk about anything now, right? And
absolutely.
When they do that, they're often talking about little tidbits about the behavior of the government officials. They'll draw your attention to the way they're acting. They'll draw your attention to things they've said or done. And that delegitimizes them all in our minds. There's that trend again. So, yeah, all these things are not brand new, but they are definitely coming out more and more in our face in these last couple of years. And that's really a great thing. I'm very excited moving forward.
Let's jump to some of the people you've had the privilege of interviewing. Carey Wedler. I had not really heard much from her. A few people had sent things my way. I was very impressed. What was your takeaway from you talking to
Yeah,
Carey?
well, the one reason I wanted to have her on is because of her focus on psychology. Again, not many of the content providers talk about psychology. So anytime I find someone who is good at it, I want to talk to them. She has a good handle on the belief in authority as the root cause of the state. She's consistent in how often she brings that out and how often she emphasizes the belief in authority. She's got that reporter style, which is great because it focuses on very specific things that are happening in the culture, in the news, current events right now. So it's very relatable. But somewhere in that content, almost always you'll see the connection back to the belief in authority. That's exactly what I've often called the direct approach in strategy. She goes beyond that. She takes psychology to the personal level. And that's particularly healthy, I think. In other words, she's talking about how you navigate the libertarian philosophy in the real world and how we deal with other people, a majority of people who are not in the same mindset, how you navigate the horrors of statism. All of it is something that is given very little attention. And she is all about trying to keep your mind grounded. And also her content is very rapid fire. So you don't get bored with it. Yeah, that was a real pleasure to get her on.
Larken Rose in particular.
Yeah,
Talk
yeah,
about
for
him.
sure. Larkin, I've followed him for at least 5 years now. And what's great about him, of course, is his laser focus on the belief in authority. That's the center target for him. And he feels, rightly, I think, that as the myth of authority erodes, inevitably the state is going to lose grip and eventually just have to dissolve into nothingness. One of the reasons I waited a while before reaching out to him was because I had only, about a year ago maybe, finally in the course of my Myth of Authority series, started to see the first glimmer that we are on the road to a free society. Just so we're clear, it's a 23-part series. It's not until around part 10 or 11, right in there, which is halfway through roughly, that I myself realized that the psychological insights revealed that we're plausibly on the road to a free society in a very tangible way. So it took, let's say, a year to internalize it, understand it, flesh it out, explain it, then start to talk about it on the podcast, and then start to interview people and put it out there and see what the reactions were. I saved Larkin until recently only because I felt that if some of the heavy hitters that were being interviewed by me had some objections, some philosophical, logical objections to the logic and the empirical evidence I was presenting, that we're on the road to a free society now, they would have brought it up. They would have recognized it. Their minds are the kind who find flaws in thinking real easily.
Agreed.
And none of that really happened. And for the most part, I got agreement, not that we're on the road to a free society, but that the puzzle pieces that I was assembling are individually valid. One puzzle piece, right? That power seekers are attracted to power environments. Yes, agreement on that, right? That the majority of people at the core are anarchists, even though they're not anarchists publicly in the political realm. Yeah. So these various puzzle pieces that eventually get put together and give you the picture that, hey, we're on the road to a free society at the beginning of it anyway. That conclusion, I didn't necessarily pin anyone down and ask them, so do you agree we're on the road to a free society? But at least I didn't get pushback on the puzzle pieces. It was by that point that I thought, okay, then I want to run it past Larkin. I want to see what he has to say about this. And I did not prep him ahead of time. We had only agreed ahead of time that we were going to do a little play acting role where he would be the state. He would act as the voice of the state, and I would be the interviewer of the state. That was the only prep ahead of time. Aside from that, everything you see in that interview is me kind of talking to him about some of these insights and just getting his reaction. And his reaction was, yes, we're absolutely on the road to a free society. I think he would agree it's at the very beginning stages. But he went beyond that happily. He affirmed in his opinion that it's an unstoppable trend, that it is happening, that we ain't going back. So I think that was a real pleasure for me to be validated that way. I'm still very open to being disvalidated. If I'm saying something wrong, if I'm not, seeing the logic properly, I want to hear about it. Okay, this is a little video clip I put together, and I posted it on Twitter. The title of this is Libertarians Helping, and I called it Conventional Libertarians Helping Us Get to a Free Society. Here we go. Okay. So that's my little stab at libertarians trying to help get us to a free society. So
awesome.
So we shouldn't have to explain which is which there. The libertarians are clearly nerd guy, and the subway is the path to a free society that's already on its way, and it's happening. And the confluence of the two facts of technology reaching the point it has, decentralized information, and the natural psychology of human beings has now merged. We are at a point in history now where it's merged, and it has gotten its legs, so to speak. And that confluence is a train that's going to take us to a free society, simply because it's going to undermine and erode propaganda in an accelerated way. So that's, in a nutshell, what's happening. This year, I'm definitely going to do things like that, where I'm basically taking it for granted that that's where we are and that's where things are headed. Because if I take it for granted, then I think that the listeners, the guests I have on, are going to clearly understand what I'm trying to say here, and then hopefully be curious about it, ask about it, push back on it. That's the dialogue I want to have this year.
Outstanding. Look forward to it. What I don't care for in the recurring dialogue of the people in this space is how stupid the masses must be. We have some bit of information they don't know, so we're smarter than them. Why they don't get it makes them stupid. Aren't these the same people that, to those people, isn't it their doctor who may operate on them that's one of those people that doesn't get this? Or their banker, not really harming anybody. I kind of get tired of hearing that over and over, how stupid everyone else is.
Yeah, that's disappointing. That's an attitude that's across all of the libertarian movement entirely. And I don't like hearing that kind of stuff. The libertarians get frustrated in the masses because they don't understand the role of the masses. They still feel, by and large, that you need the masses somehow different than what they are.
To be clear, the libertarians don't understand the masses' role.
Correct.
Not the masses don't understand their own role.
Exactly. Right. The libertarians have this image that the majority have a role that they need to play in this story, and they're not playing it. And that role is, you got to be smarter than you are right now. You got to be better than you are. You got to be whatever. You got to be more principled than you are. You're not good enough the way you are. That's the general libertarian attitude to the masses. That's very condescending, and to me, it's absurd. It's first of all, it's absurd strategically, because you should know, if you claim to be Mr. Libertarian, that you're smart. Observe the real world. When do the masses go along with any movement, any party? All right, some of them do. There's always a group that goes along with something. But you're talking about some kind of massive movement that takes over the world somehow. Libertarianism, it's not going to happen. I think part of it is blame. It's that the libertarians have failed to move the needle very much at all. And so instead of blaming themselves, they could blame the masses. See, people are just too stupid for this.
Interesting.
Right? Interesting that you don't look in the mirror and think, oh, maybe it's you. Maybe you're not good at it. Maybe you just had the whole strategy wrong to begin with. Of course, I lump myself into that, because up until a year ago, I was thinking that outreach, messaging, activism is the only way the ideas would spread. And I think that did make sense. But it ended up being short-sighted. But even at that time, it would have been mean-spirited to look down on the majority. They're living their lives the best they can. Now, do they get overwhelmed by the propaganda? Yes, they're victims of a cult. They're victims of psychological abuse. If you libertarians want to blame the victim, all right, be my guest, go ahead. But that's what you're doing. You're blaming the victims. Libertarians hate how people reacted during COVID. Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like finding out that people so easily were frightened by this mass hysteria. Okay, I don't like that, but I accept it. I accept that people's psychological vulnerability was leveraged by these powers to frighten them into believing there was a global pandemic that was going to annihilate an appreciable percentage of the world, because that's how this was presented. People reacted in the same way they would have reacted if they knew an asteroid was going to hit. So to blame them for reacting with fear is very unfair. But then the libertarians can't recognize the white pill that happens a year and a half, 2 years after that, which is the environment had changed to where the government lifted the mandates. They backed off. Do you think for 1 minute they did that because of the goodness of their hearts? No, we would still have those mandates today, and they would continue if the government could have done it. But something about a slow, barely perceptible resistance that was starting to bubble up. Not anything you could have pointed to, but something was tangible. That 2.5 years into COVID, people were kind of feeling that they were over it. They weren't liking it as much. That didn't morph into outright disobedience very much, or outright resistance or revolution. No. Do you know why? It ended up not getting to the point where it was, actual riots in the streets, actually, banging on doors of Capitol buildings and demanding the lifting of the mandates. Why it never got there? Because the small percentage of the amount that it did travel that road of moderate unhappiness, almost barely perceptible, that amount, that was enough to scare the state. That little tiny bit of resistance was enough to scare the state. In other words, that little bit, and you won't even remember it probably, that right in that 2.5 year period, people were just like, you sensed they were sort of over it. That sense of sort of being over it, that was enough to change the environment that the state knew. And when I say knew, I don't mean one person knew it, but the state itself sensed that, these mandates are not gonna, they're not
sustainable.
They're not sustainable. That's the word. They're not sustainable. And we know that is the psychology because almost collectively across the world, certainly across the United States, the mandates just started getting lifted. A lot of them in Europe before the United States, but they just started happening here and there. To think that was coordinated is ridiculous. The very fact that it wasn't coordinated is such great evidence that the psychology was what drove it. It was a growing sense that this is not sustainable. And the state sensed that the best thing is to sort of notch it down more, turn it off. So the state knew, quote unquote, knew that if they continued the mandates, there was going to be riots and they would be the targets of those riots. No one wants that. Let's just cut it off now. And once again, I've said this before, further proof they didn't even claim victory. There were no parades, no fireworks.
That's a mind blower.
Nothing. If you conquered a threat to humanity, you would have shot up a few fireworks. Nothing. They wanted to forget it because they knew that people were starting to have enough. Anyway, that to me is the common man doing what they do, living their life, and the masses in that case are the heroes. Not because they did anything heroic, but because they were just who they are. And who they are communicated just enough dissatisfaction and skepticism to the COVID mandates that they backed off. I mean, shame on libertarians who try to put down the masses. The masses have a role in the transition to a free society, but it's that passive sort of role. The inertia they bring today that keeps statism going is the inertia that's going to get us out of it. It's not the only factor. All these other factors, technology, psychology, are in play, and those are the things that are going to move that ship at sea slightly, right? And inch by inch every year, whatever. It's going to accelerate as time goes on. But once it's on this new path toward freedom, it's the masses who are going to keep it going and secure it. So shame on the libertarians for putting down the masses. I am an advocate of the masses all the way. When they get red-pilled on an individual basis, it's a wonderful thing. And that's why a lot of us still talk to the newbies out there, because we would like to help them personally. But that's very different from thinking that that has anything to do with some sort of bigger contribution to the road to a free society. Nothing to do with it. When we're eventually in a free society, human beings will be exactly the way they are right now. We won't see some kind of conscious awakening in the masses of people. There may be a higher number of libertarians out there because more will be interested in the scholarship and the philosophy and the economics. So people might gravitate to that. I could certainly see that happening. But that has nothing to do with this idea that the masses have to change in any way.
Is there anything you want to throw in about what's coming?
I don't have any particular plans, but overall, I'm definitely going to focus much, much more on this sort of idea where I'm taking it for granted that we are on the road to a free society. I want that to be in the conversation more and more and more. Again, I'll say it again and again. If there's some flaw in this thinking, I want to know about it. But so far, I'm not saying it. I want to talk about some of the things that my guests would like to do if they weren't doing this, if they weren't activists. Now, the scholars, that's different. That's their calling in life. That's their job. That's their career. But for the activists who spend their time trying to convince others, I really want to ask them what other things they would be doing if it weren't for this, because it's definitely arguable now that they don't have to be doing this anymore. Pure messaging activism. If there's things in life they would have loved doing and they're putting on the shelf, I'd love to suggest to them, you can be doing that, and we're probably going to head to a free society without you doing the activism, because technology's kind of taken that off your plate. So
I look forward to those conversations.
So thank you again, James. Was there anything else? I think you exhausted your list that you had for me.
We exhausted my list.
Good. And I'm really happy that you reached out, because I was looking for a topic for a year-end episode. I won't be ready probably by the actual end of the year, so it'll be in the first couple of days probably of 2026. But still, it's a great recap. And thank you all for joining and for joining me throughout 2025. We're looking forward to a great 2026. Take care and see you next time.
Thanks so much to all subscribers and everyone who joined today. And remember, keep looking for those white pills.